What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and welcome back to part 2 of our Vincent Price sort of retrospective. We'll do a proper retrospective one day. I'll go back and probably do things like the post-cycle maybe, or maybe we'll do a full The Fly retrospective. I'll do all of them. Anyway, in the last episode, I gave you a bio, a full sort of, not too detailed, but a biography of the great man himself, Vincent Price, from his birth in 1911 all the way through his career, well into the 80s and his final death in 1903. However, that's sort of like him. And I gave some notes about why I got into him and how I came across him, which was interesting. I came across him watching House on Haunted Hill, which we are going to talk about more today, and a couple of other films. But I want to talk more about me. My top 5 is what I'm going to talk about today. I love a good list. I love a good list. So we're going to talk about my top 5. Now, that's not to say these are the definitive best Vincent Price films. Oh no, I'm sure there'll be other people that disagree with me and other films that get thrown in. And we will note a couple of those I think are worth noting as well at the end. But this is my top 5. These are my 5 favourites. These are the ones I go back to the most. And so, yeah, we're going to throw them in. We're going to start time. I'm going to do a proper full countdown. Top of the pop style. And let's get into it. We're going to talk about each of them individually a little bit. So, start with number 5. Number 5, and again, it sounds like least of the list, but it's not. This is his top 5 of a very long list of films. Is Witchfinder General from 1968, directed by Michael Reeves. And this is Vincent Price doing something a little different at this time. In the 60s, he had done the post-cycle. He'd done some dramatic roles, I suppose, and had pushed it a little bit with some of those the post films, especially sort of House of Usher, Tomb of Ligeia, and I love those films. No, they don't quite make it into top 5, which I think some people will really dispute. But in this, he's playing something different, because in those films he plays sort of like almost like the victim, but like in House of Usher he's playing the victim for curse. He feels that he is downtrodden and he is the victim of all this other stuff. And in Tomb of Ligeia, he's a grieving man who feels he's haunted by his deceased wife. So he's playing that in a somber sort of macabre way. With playing Matthew Hopkins, the Witchfinder General, a real person who I believe in the 17th century, maybe earlier 16th century, I don't know. No, 17th, it must have been, because it's Oliver Cromwell, would ride the countryside and with no authority other than his own would declare that he had the power and the authority and the power to decide which women in a village or a town were witches. He would come in and there would be accusations, they would be brought forward and there would be tests done, and these women would then be punished, usually by hanging or burning or whatever. And the tests are ridiculous. I mean, I think if any of you done any form of sort of historical study in this area, even in basic for Americans in high school and in secondary school, you'll have heard of things like the ducking stool, where they'll dunk you underwater. If you drowned, well, that shows that you weren't a witch, and if you didn't drown, well, you're a witch and you're going to get burnt. So there was really no way of winning at any of this. And there's some ridiculous things like that. And this film sort of plays into that. It's not so much, this film isn't a supernatural film. You'd think it would, but with his past record and the fact it's got witch in the title, Witchfinder General, but it's not. This is very much more of a psychological horror, more like a period thriller in many ways. But Matthew Hopkins takes interest in this lady as, not being a witch, but until she decides she's not going to be with him, and then decides to do his thing, do what he does. and in that a sort of a young Cromwellian soldier decides to take his revenge on Matthew Hopkins. Now the thing with this film is that it's not particularly long. You know, it's sort of 87 minutes. I've got the thing for it's 87 minutes. But there's a lot packed into this film. It's really quite a dense film. Because it covers this whole thing around the historical context of Matthew Hopkins, Oliver Cromwell and his place in Britain at the time, how the soldiers were sort of leading their lives, you know, marching across the country. But it also sort of adds into this thing of like what British life was like, and also these sort of folklorish ideas that sort of existed around this time about witches and superstitions and folklore, to the extent that this is actually considered a part of what is often called the folk horror trilogy, this trilogy of films that sort of ignited folk horror, or at least sort of cemented it. Witchfinder General, the Wicker Man, and the Blood on Satan's Claw all come out around this time, between sort of 65 and 75. And then you get sort of folk horror coming out of the back of that a little bit more. But you know, whilst the Blood and Satan's Claw is definitely a supernatural film, and that's another great film that I may one day talk about. In fact, I might even just do that as a trilogy to talk about these films. And the same with sort of The Wicker Man. There's no real supernatural element to that, just a cultish behaviour. And that's what this film is about. This film really leans into the revenge element more than anything. But the thing to hammer home is, up until this point, Vincent Price is known, yes, to play villains, you know, and we'll cover a couple more in this list, but they've all been very sort of like convivial, you know, they've been quite sort of like smooth and, you know, sophisticated, you know, modern men, really, I suppose. Matthew Hopkins he's an absolute fucking brute. You know, he's well educated. He's clearly more educated than others around, and he uses that. But he's an absolute bastard. You know, as you would say in sharp country, he's a proper bastard. And he plays it to an absolute T. He's wonderful in this. Having played all these nice characters in the past, sort of these much softer characters in the past, like, he wants to get his teeth into this, and it's clear that he is relishing the opportunity to play someone so vile and horrible. Like, he doesn't want you to sort of root for him in any way. This isn't, you know, that sort of, not an anti-hero, but a sort of a hero baddie, or a soft, sympathetic villain or whatever. It's not that. He is vile throughout, and wonderfully so. The other thing is, what this film is like, one of the weird things is, because it is a good film, it's a really good film actually, and I mentioned this in the last podcast, is Reeves, the director, and Vincent Price didn't get on a great deal. They disagreed about quite a few things in the filmmaking. However, in working together, they do actually form a really good duo, and it's clear that they do agree on some things. And Vincent Price brings his A game, but Reeves, more than anything, shoots the shit out of this. There are some really well shot scenes. You know, and some great vistas, and they really utilise the countryside well, and it make you realise how barren it probably was at this point in the 17th century. So, yes, so number 5 is the Witchfinder General, and I, you know, again, highly recommend it. It's a good start. It's a good opener for this. So, moving on, other end of the scale, completely other end of the scale. Number 4 is the Comedy of Terrors, an earlier film, 1963, directed by Jack Tournier, and in this, Vincent Price plays Waldo Trumbull, or Turnbull, as he keeps getting called. And this is very far away from Witchfinder General. This is almost like a carry-on, like a farce comedy. Price plays Waldo Trumbull, who is a con man, a drunk, again playing the villain, like, you know, a thoroughly horrible person, but playing it for laughs this time, a much more sort of smoother character. But he's a con man who has wormed his way into a woman's life. He's become her husband in order to get a part of her father's funeral parlour business, and now he's elderly and he runs it, and he is running it into the ground, and sees that his livelihood is about to go, and they pull all these tricks to cut corners. And his sidekick, Peter Lorre, who is excellent in this, like absolutely fantastic. Another one who just seems to have fantastic comedy timing, and they do a great comedy duo. I mean, they work together. I think the same year, or the year before at least. I can't remember to find out. On The Raven, which is part of the Poe cycle. But in this, like Price and Laurie are basically sort of trying to find ways of saving money, and the way they sort of seem to do it is, in the opening scene, they have like this funeral procession, and it's all very somber, and they're all sort of giving that the one smile of like, our condolences and that sort of thing. And then the moment the people are out of the way, they literally just hoof the body out of the coffin. This very swanky coffin they've got, hoof the body into the ground and cover it in dirt, and then put the coffin back in, and they reuse this coffin over and over again. And it turns out later in the film as well, they've been doing this for 13 years, which is a great little gag. But the other thing is, and it's a great point, in this town, his business is going downhill, yet there are still people dying. So why is that? It's because he doesn't have much of a decent reputation. More than that, he owes rent, a year's rent, to his landlord, played by Basil Rathbone. And so, in wanting to pay off this debt, he finds they go a bit Burke and Hare, basically, that we need people to bury. If they're not coming to us, we need to generate business. So how do you generate business? You start killing people. So that's what they do. They start to bump people off. And so you get these sort of like this series of events then around trying to bury people, and each one's like a comedy skit. Like the first one they kill this guy off because it's sort of almost instigated by this guy's wife. But they kill this person off. They're ready to bury him, and she's run off with the money. So he's still out of pocket. And these little jokes continue like that. And it escalates and escalates, and there's some great moments. But again, in it, it really plays to Price's comedy chops in this. Like he plays again. Like he knows how to be vile but funny, and it's all about being this sort of sophisticate. Like he's horrible to his wife, and and he's just vile to the Peter Lorre character, but he's actually I still like him in this film. I really like him, and he's fantastic. And it also comes out there's a meme. If you do the Vincent Price meme game, you put him into a GIF, I should say. You put into your phone or into Twitter or whatever. There's one there, and it says it's so bad, how sad, or how sad, so bad. And that's from this film, and he does this sort of face of like, and he has that sort of that long face that he's able to pull. And weird. I have this weird thing. Like I kind of like Carry On films. If you don't know what Carry On film is, well, one, they talk about those. It's a series of British comedy films from sort of 50s through to the 70s, and it's very sort of farcical humour. It's sort of very it's relatively mature. It's toilet humour in many cases. Don't like all of it, but there's a couple that really stand out. And there's one called Carry On Screaming, which is excellent. And this sort of fits into that. Like not every joke lands. But there's still some really good, solid moments in this that make me chuckle. Like this is a proper, not belly laughs, but I just enjoy this film. There's a good sense to this film, and of course, it all ends up. I'm not going to spoil the ending, but it ends up as you would expect in these cases. Like the villains, and the so-called heroes. But the thing is, this film also plays like a play. You could easily sort of transcribe this to. I think you could easily do something right then to make this a stage play. But yeah, I don't know much to say about that really. Comedy of Terrors. It's a good film. It's available through. This is one of the ones I got through Arrow. Actually, it's a great edition. Just to know, I would say about Peter Lorre as well. Peter Lorre. I was first introduced to Peter Lorre a little bit like with Vincent Price as well. I knew of him. I'd seen him in Casablanca. He's in Casablanca, and a couple of gangster films. I think is he in Maltese Falcon? I don't know, but those are gangster films. And I know then that he had in Aladdin, the genie sort of when he's saying about bringing people back to life. But doesn't kill anyone, but bring people back to life. I don't like doing it. That's the Peter Lorre voice. And so he's just one of these actors, characters. If you were to, and Looney Tunes always, he's got a very distinctive face, very round face, big sort of bug eyes, and they kind of like using him as a caricature quite a lot. But if you were to ask a lot of people, they've probably never heard of him, which is a real shame because he's actually very, very good. So very good in this. Anyway, I'm going to keep going. We're going to keep going with this, ladies and gentlemen. We're doing all right. So, because we're going to get some big talk about the rest of them. So, let's get to the next one. Number 3. Number 3 is The Haunted Palace, also from 1963, directed by Roger Corman, often attributed to the Poe cycle. However, The Haunted Palace isn't a Poe film. They try to make it part of a Poe film by, I think The Haunted Palace may be a title, or they add a line in, or a piece of poetry or something like that, which they do with a couple of others. But it's not a Poe film. It's not based on a Poe story. In fact, it's based on one of my favourite writers, H.P. Lovecraft. The Haunted Palace is actually a very loose adaptation of the case of Charles Dexter Ward. Now, the original case of Charles Dexter Ward is a really sort of labyrinthine story of, stories within a story, and there's characters doing this and people that aren't who they say they are and all kinds of things going on. It's a fucking awesome story. This is a little more straightforward. It's very much the character of Charles Dexter Ward inherits a palace, or a big castle on a hill in this sort of Dunwich kind of town, or Innsmouth kind of town. It has that sort of feel to it. Very foggy. The people there are all a little bit. There's a sort of a strain of person that lives in this town that has deformities. They're missing eyes or growths and all kinds of things. Anyway, he turns up to this town. They inherit this castle that he's inherited, and it's obvious that people don't want him there. And when he goes to visit it, they're like, "Look, we'll do it up. A bit of a flip, basically. We'll do it up, make it look nice, and then we'll sell it on, and we'll make a fortune." And as they go through the castle, and as they say that, they get visitors that are like, one saying like, you should leave, and others saying, you're not part of town, that sort of thing. As Charles sort of roots his way through this building, he feels more and more at home. He starts to sort of go, this is maybe where I should be. This is something different to me. And he starts to have these sort of flashbacks and this other stuff. And then what you find out is that an ancestor, Kerwin, Joseph Kerwin, dealt in the black arts and witchcraft and all this other stuff many years ago, and was going to sacrifice a young girl, and the villagers storm the castle. All very sort of like Universal monster style. They storm the castle, they drag him out, save the girl, or they think they've saved the girl, but she's clearly still possessed. They save the girl, strap him to a tree, and they burn him alive. Now, both Joseph Kerwin and Charles Dexter Ward played by Vincent Price. But over time, something happens, or he unearths something, and the spirit of Joseph Kerwin starts to take over Charles Dexter Ward, and starts to sort of like, there'll be moments when he's sort of like, he has like blackouts, and he can't remember where he's been for hours and stuff. And they can't get down to the basement, and he doesn't know why. He seems to remember that he's been there, but he doesn't know how to get there when he's Charles Dexter Ward. And then the servants, these two sort of people, there's a manservant and somebody else that just start to act bizarrely. I think one of them was Lon Chaney Jr. They start acting up funny, and then basically it turns out that eventually sort of Joseph Kerwin does take him over, and he wants to use his wife for a sacrifice. And they have a friend who has sort of like, has come in to save the day and all this other stuff. And the end of this film, like, they have the Charles Dexter Ward wins out, but he's able to get his personality back. Or at least, is he? That sort of there's a bit of a question mark at the end, which is great. But there's a wicked shot in this film where they have the woman over this pit that's in the basement. And it's sort of, you're about to lower in. It's to feed this thing in the basement, or to below the basement, whether it be like an elder god or whatever it is that Joseph Kerwin was praying to and worshipping and using to gain his magical powers. And you see it, and what they've done is they've sort of, it's almost like an underwater effect. It's all sort of ripply and sort of stuff, but it's perfectly described. It's almost like a perfect depiction of what how you would describe a Lovecraftian monster. Like, there's something there, and it's got, it looks like it's got tentacles and eyes and sort of stuff, but you just can't see it. It's undescribable, or indescribable. And I think it's such a good shot, and considering it's a Corman film and not even one of his top ones, from his point of view, I think it's a real achievement. And it just plays out. It's relatively short. It's about an hour and a half, and but it packs again in so much. And the fact that, like I say, I love that Price gets to stretch himself in this, because playing both Charles Dexter Ward and Joseph Kerwin, like, he's playing into, as Joseph Kerwin, like, he plays into that sort of stoic, gruff, villainous character, sort of that you expect. He's a proper baddie. But then as Charles Dexter Ward, like, he plays it much more as a sophisticated. He flips between them at times, and there are moments when you're not entirely sure which one he is, and he plays it down the line. And that's one of the things I like about this. These three really start to epitomise why I like Vincent Price in so many of his roles. That you see these memes that are going about, sort of like, he knew the assignment, and you show the 4 pictures, whatever. Vincent Price always knew the assignment. He knew whether it was going to be full humour or to go for the melodrama or whatever. Like, he got it. And I think that's one of the important things. It was probably one of the things he sort of jutted up against with Reeves in The Witchfinder General, because he sort of, he got when to use humour and when to use the macabre or something darker. Like, he seems to understand that, especially playing villains. Like, he always said in interviews, I've heard him numerous times say, like, the reason he liked to play villains because they're more fun. You could do more with them, and I think that's what he's trying to do, is give them depth, because you could just be the one note. And he does do one note villains as well. There has been a couple, but with this he sort of manages to keep that balance, and there's some great moments in this. And it obviously has things like the Necronomicon in, and it really sort of touches on the Lovecraftian side of things. But one of the things I love about this film as well is the aesthetic when they go into, and I'm trying to remember the name of the town. I swear to God, it's called either Dunwich or Innsmouth. Can't remember. But the people with the deformities and these other bits and pieces, like, it really is. It creeps me out. It's proper creepy. But I also like the fact that they have, like, this thing of generational, this legacy. So there's characters from 200 years, I think there's 100 or 150 years before, and the actors are playing their ancestors in both periods, the modern and the previous. And so there's this idea of sort of like them playing out the same roles over again. This idea of a time, it's not like it's not a time loop, it's not a time travel movie, but this idea of legacy and generations playing out the same roles over and over again. And I don't think it tends to be deep, but it's there. It's there, and it's not part of the subcontext. It's not subtext. It's definitely context. But yeah, it's a great film, and it has some fantastic shots. It suffers from one of there's a couple of shots actually I would say that it does suffer from, and this is a common thing. I suppose it's a 60s thing as well. Is transitioning from the wide shots that are clearly outside to the close-in shots or the locked shots that are clearly on a set, and the transitions don't always look great, and it's a bit distracting. There's at least 2 in this film I find very distracting, but other than that, the sets are fantastic. Like, the castle, the palace is absolutely fantastic. So yeah, certainly that's the Haunted Palace, again available from Arrow. Beautiful film as well. This is probably the first. This is the first Corman. In fact, this is the only Corman one on the list. And I have to say, I suppose it's worth touching on at this point the Poe trilogy, because a couple that just fell out of it is like House of Usher, and the thing with Roger Corman, everyone thinks he was like the cheap director and all this other stuff, but if you watch these films, these early 60s films, like The Haunted Palace, House of Usher, Tomb of Ligeia is another one. Tomb of Ligeia is badass. It's got some really fantastic stuff in. Not my favourite film, but it's just got some really good stuff in. The guy had a real eye for texture and for colour, and just this, again, knowing when to use it. Like House of Usher has a real sort of a colourful palette to it, but it's all in service of this sort of contradiction of, like, you know, the clothes are very luscious and fine silks or velvets, and there's all these fine drapes and sort of stuff in this house, but you know that there's this sort of rot running through all of it, and it sort of masks it but not quite, and you sort of see that in the film. And the same sort of true of the Haunted Palace. Is sort of like, you know, he knows when to use the shadows and when to use the sort of the grime. And you see, you know, when they're in the palace, there's moments that are shot with has this massive open fire, and they use it as parts. Must be additional lighting used, but it lights this part of the castle. And when he's Charles Dexter Ward, the lighting is of a certain style. And then when he's Joseph Kerr, when it comes down and there's more shadows and his face is in shadow and stuff like that. And Corman just knew how to get things in the can. He was like, I know what I want, know how to do it, crack on. And, you know, that's really impressive. Anyway, Haunted Palace, great film. So, coming into the top 2 now. So, number 2. This one's a doozy. Absolute doozy. I ran not such a poll. I wouldn't say there's a poll, but I did a bit of a question on Facebook the other day. Excuse me. Asking everybody what their top 5 Vincent Price films were. I did it on 2 Vincent Price appreciation pages, and as you can imagine, the 5s altered quite a bit. But there were 2 films that sort of pretty much existed on every single one. They were my top 2. There was another film we'll talk about after this that turned up a lot, but these top 2 turned up on pretty much everybody's list. And this one was said to be was top on a lot of people's list. But also, apparently, it was one of Vincent Price's personal favourite films to do. And it's Theatre of Blood from 1973. Directed by Douglas Hickox. And Vincent Price plays Edward Lionheart. Great name. And what he is, he's a thespian. He's an ageing actor who's been doing stage work all his life. And this is, you know, he's obviously so close to Price himself. Lionheart's almost like a cousin to Vincent Price in many ways. So Lionheart's this ageing actor, done stage and screen all his life, mainly stage. And he feels, in his own opinion, that he is one of the best, if not the best, Shakespearean actor on the British stage. And he's never been recognised for it. He doesn't feel like he's had that recognition that he fully deserves. And so there's going to be this award ceremony, and he may or may not be in the running for this Lifetime Achievement Award, this really prestigious award, and he doesn't get it. And when he doesn't get it, he storms in on this party the critics are having and gives this massive tirade about why they're all wrong and you know, how they broke him and all this other stuff. And whilst this is going on, his daughter comes in and sort of apologises for him, and then he storms onto the balcony. And this balcony is overlooking the Thames. So this is a London film, I should say. Like this is a British film. And then he just flies off the balcony, and that's it. They'll think he's dead. They'll think he's committed suicide. The body's never found, and they think that's the last of it. This is this crazy Edward Lionheart eventually committed suicide, you know, but just based on his own narcissism and you know, sense of self-grandeur. Anyway, a year or so later, these critics start to die off in some of the weirdest ways. And it turns out that these ways of murder, or death, but it is murder, are representative of the ways characters die in Shakespeare plays. And they get bloodier and bloodier and crazier and crazier. And my favourite one is one of the critics. It's a representation or adaptation of Titus Andronicus, and in that, a character is fed their own children, and this critic is fed his own. He mothers or he fathers. He parents these 2 poodles, and then they get turned into pies, and he feels he gets duped into being on this cuisine show, and he gets fed these pies with his dogs in. It's really weird and dark in that respect, and there's a lot of death in this film, but it's a comedy. This is a proper comedy horror, or a horror comedy, whichever way you want to put it. And Price is in full camp in this. Like, he, you know, talk about knowing the assignment, fully on it. And he plays all these different characters throughout it. Like, for the one I talk about, the Titus Andronicus one, the food one, he plays like this guy. You know, he plays a chef with these like big sideburns, his big hat, and he's playing it all. And then he kills one of the women, the female critics, by being a hairdresser. And he's got this big like blonde afro and these massive sunglasses and all this other stuff. And, like, it's clear he is having an absolute blast doing this. And more so when he gets to the scenes of that, like, he turns and he starts. It does get dark, and he does all these Shakespearean scenes. Like, Price is lapping it up. Like, he is absolutely having a blast, and because he is having a blast and so enjoying it, like, the film just has this joy to it. It's this sort of like bizarre manic joy that is absolutely wonderful to behold. And it helps by the fact the cast are clearly all in on this joke. You know, they all know what they're in and how to do it and all this other stuff, and it works so well. One of the weird things, and this is actually something that sort of, I'm wondering, it was put as a theory that this film was actually put up as a parody of an earlier film, The Abominable Dr. Phibes, which we'll talk about in a bit actually. But I'm not sure if that's the truth. But one of the reasons is for that is in Dr. Phibes, the killer has this sort of weird androgynous sidekick. She's female, but like doesn't speak, doesn't do anything at all. And you're not even too sure if she may even be a robot. It's sort of suggested. But in this, Diana Rigg sort of fulfills that role, but she's a lot more proactive. And she is Lionheart's daughter, and she partakes and helps sort of like with these murders, playing again, and she gets to go in costume, playing like males and females and all kinds of things. She's brilliant. Absolutely, and don't feel like she is stunningly beautiful. This is sort of 74. It's post the Avengers, but yes, she's still wonderful in this. Absolutely beautiful, and absolutely hilarious in parts. But again, knows how to do the drama. And yeah, it sort of. How to describe it really? It just relishes this is one of those horror films that just relishes being, relishes in the horror, but without being nasty about it. You know, like, yes, we're gonna have a character eaten to death by ants, or yes, we are gonna have someone eat their own dogs, or yes, we're gonna kill someone. Like, we are gonna try and kill someone by impaling them on something. Like, yeah, we're gonna do all that, but you know what? We're gonna have a blast doing it. It's gonna be hilarious. We're gonna be fun doing it. And that's why I love this film so much. I mean, it has like a really poignant ending as well. Like, you know, it ends, I think of like Frankenstein or Hunchback of Notre Dame, those sort of things. Like, the film ends with Lionheart being pursued to his lair, I suppose. And you find out that he's trained all these sort of like demented homeless people to sort of partake in these Shakespearean plays, and they've all learnt lines, but that seems to be all they know, and they recite them over and over and over again in this maddening way. But when the police get there and they save another copper who's been captured, his daughter, Lionheart's daughter, gets shot, and Lionheart then climbs up into the rafters with her body, sort of trying to get away. And then eventually the theatre catches fire, and it's just him, and eventually just trying to escape the flames with his daughter, still shouting at these critics and people for not recognising his talent and his greatness. And then eventually the roof just caves in and he just disappears. It's brilliant. It's such a good film. I may have to go watch it in a minute. But yeah, Theatre of Blood, 1973, is in at number 2 for the best reason possible, because it's well acted, it's a tight film, and I've said about this being a blast, but this is so much fun. It's I tell you what it is. You could sit and just watch this film, and I have done, and I often do. But you could easily like bang this on with some beers and some friends and be like, let's watch this. This is hilarious. So highly recommend it. Theatre of Blood. Anyway, down to number 1. I've talked about quite a bit. Let's get back to the list. So, number 1. Number 1 at the top with a bullet or a noose or a skeleton or a vat of acid. Could be anything. We are talking The House on Haunted Hill, 1959, directed by William Castle. One of his sort of fright interactive movies. This was all part of his big thing of trying to make the cinema interactive. Even in the 50s, film producers and theatre owners, cinema owners, were worried people were going to go leave the theatre, cinemas. They thought it was a passing fad. They were really concerned. So they were trying to make it different, 3D and all these different things. And William Castle introduced a number of things. Another film that he did with Price just after this was The Tingler. And in that, they find there's an entity that lives in the human body, a parasite that lives on your fear. And when these things happen in the film, the seats would have a buzzer on them, so people get a proper little zap and stuff like that. And there's a story as well that during The Tingler, during its opening week, Vincent Price would sneak into cinemas at the back and watch people watching it, see how they reacted. And these two girls, he went to the screen and these two girls were sat there. And as they were enjoying the film, sort of like he sat back and watching. Then the buzzers had gone off a few times, and then just as the film ended, he leaned in between them and said, "My dear ladies, I do hope you enjoyed the show." And he's obviously in that very distinctive voice. But these two ladies crapped themselves and ran out. So this is the kind of thing I think Price clearly thrived and enjoyed doing this stuff. But that's The Tingler. That's a different story. In fact, you can check a review of that out on Stories Out of Time and Space, our sister podcast with me and Julian Darius. And we do talk about The Tingler during our 50s sci-fi block. Anyway, back to this film. House on Haunted Hill. Price plays Frederick Loren, who, again, he's sort of like a suave and erudite businessman, sort of a sophisticate. He's had multiple marriages, and each one of his wives has mysteriously gone missing. And now he's on to number 5, I think, at this point. Anyway, they don't get on, and they have this wonderfully venomous relationship. And it's they just have this catty sort of go at each other constantly. When they're talking at one point, and he says, "Do you remember that time you tried to poison me? What wonderful times we've had." And she sort of says, "Well, next time I'll try something else." He says, "Oh, my dear," he's just so oozes. He's smarmy and slimy, but oozes sophistication and smoothness in this film. A real charisma. That's the whole thing about this Price. He just has this charisma that I'm drawn to. Anyway, he holds this party at this house, the house allegedly on Haunted Hill, and the idea is that this house is haunted by the spirits of I think it's 6 people that have been killed in the house. At one point, a woman went crazy and killed these people, and only her brother survived. And so her brother's actually a guest at this house. And he's sort of brought in as a bit of a mark more than anything. Like, he's been challenged to come back to the house, and in doing so, he will be given £10,000 if he survives overnight. But it's clear like he's been put there as a sort of like a panic plant, because the more he talks, the more the people start to panic, which is really cool. He keeps saying things like he'll find things. Like, they find a knife. He's like, this could be like the knife that she used to kill them. It's really funny. But the others are all these people. They're just sort of people that he knows from his business. I think one of them's like a secretary from his business, and then one of them's like his solicitor. One's I forget like a fighter pilot or something. There's these people. They're just random people. Don't really know them. And they're all brought to his house. And the idea is if they can stay the night, they will get $10,000, I should say. Anyway, it turns out this whole thing is a farce, and they're all sort of Vincent Price or Frederick Loren and his wife are sort of trying to work on each other to try and not so much kill each other off, but there's something else going on, basically. And at one point, like you find the wife hung. She's been hanged. And everyone's like, "Oh my God, you've been murdered!" And then people see it, and they'll see the body out the window and all sorts of stuff. And it adds to this idea of the fear. And it does sound like they've been trying to kill each other, or sort of like she has been trying to frame him for her murder, and then the body will disappear. But he can then be framed, and then she can get hold of the money and somehow. But he's also actually trying to kill her off, and he succeeds at the end of the film. The spoiler, it doesn't really spoil much. but there's this just the way it sort of interactions between all these people. Like, it's clearly like this really overwrought plan to create this alibi as to why he can get away with these things, and then just these little scares thrown in, and it carries a certain amount of tension. I mean, it's a house that feels like a haunted house ride. You know, you go around, and that's exactly what this is. Like, William Castle sets this film up brilliantly like a haunted house. You know, the house itself is creepy, and there's an awesome moment, like a proper one of the first jump scares I can think of, and it's like they're in this sort of the cellar, and then this little cordoned off room, and this woman turns around, one of the guests turn around, and this old housekeeper, like, you know, proper like is there, and she just appears out of nowhere, and then slides out of shot, and there's like no explanation for this other than like, oh, it's to scare the shit out of you. They're not like she's supernatural or whatever. Like, she's just been set up to do this thing, but it works really well. It will make you jump. But it is. It's a really sort of, again, there's a charm to this film. It's fun, but there's more like it's a charm. I mean, it's in black and white, so you know it's really there as a. I know some people struggle with that, but you know, it just works on so well. The other point about this is that the rest of the cast, again, sort of work well together. This little guy that I forget the cast name, but this guy that's at the plant, whose sister it was that did the killing, works as this character like then who just keeps every now and then, like, every time he needs to, he turns up and just sparks some horror. I mean, at one point they find a severed head in a box, and instead of being like, right, well, I'm done, you know, I'm off, they continue to talk about this and discuss things. And there's a fantastic moment. So when they're being presented the party, they're all presented with a gun for their own safety. This is clearly all part of the plan that something may happen. But each gun is presented in like a little box shaped like a coffin. Why? Other than to just be cool, that has no purpose. It's brilliant. And there's just lots of things like that in this that's just really, really good. So yeah, I just find that this is you know, one of those films. It sort of stands up. Like, Price is brilliant in it. It's his peak suave character. The character that you see in a lot of the animations, the caricature versions of Price. When you think of like the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo or things like that, when Price is played up as that sort of sophisticate horror character, the gentleman of horror, this is the character that they're talking about. This is the character they're playing. This version of him. You know, and so all these other films I talk about, you know, we would talk about things like, you know, all the films he did during the Poe cycle, or like House of Wax from the 50s, all those other ones, all those period pieces and stuff he'd done, like, you know, they are all Vincent Price, and it's him playing. However, for some reason, this film seems to sort of capture him in a certain way that has become this this legacy image of him, and it's almost like it captures him perfectly in time. Like, this is, you know, he's still young enough that he looks, you know, he has his looks, and he still looks sort of young and suave, and he's, you know, not that he ever looked terrible, but it just catches this idealized moment for him. But it's also when he sort of transitions to horror, so it's almost like this real. I mean, he's done a couple before, but this is like the birth into, you know, because of this and sort of thing is why Corman was interested in using him for the Poe cycle and so on and so forth. It just seems to capture him at a moment, and it's so good. So yeah, I can't recommend this film enough. Like, again, all these films, none of these films. I mean, you could watch probably 3 of these films in the same time it would take you to watch a Zack Snyder film. So I say check these out rather than that. But yeah, these films are fantastic, and I highly recommend it. So just going to run through one more time. So we've got number 5, Witchfinder General from 1968. Number 4, Comedy of Terrors from 1963. Number 3, The Haunted Palace, also from 1963. Number 2, Theatre of Blood, 1973. And at number 1, The House on Haunted Hill, 1959, directed by William Castle. So they're my top 5. Okay, so before we go, there's a couple of films I just want to shout out, almost like, you know, the nearly ones. also runs, runners up. And there's two or three, but I suppose I just want to shout out. So, of the Corman Poe cycle, I chose The Haunted Palace. It has Lovecraft connections, which is also a delight for me. But I really enjoy that film. But the other one to choose and watch, if you get a chance, is The House of Usher, based on the Edgar Allan Poe story, The Fall of the House of Usher. And in it, Price plays Roderick Usher. And again, he goes full to town. He bleaches his hair. And he plays it to a T. It's a wonderful film. It's really luscious. This was probably the first film where AIP put a lot of money into it. It had an extra additional shooting. Corman was given more flexibility, and it all pays off into an absolute classic of a film. It's a period piece, so don't forget that. But it looks tremendous, and the film itself is actually pretty good. It has a real sort of like gothic, somber tone to it. Weirdly gothic, but still being luscious in colour. Great film. The other one then to throw out is a bit of a how to describe them. They are preceding Theatre of Blood, but are very, very the same thing. This is a story of he's a doctor who, following an accident, his wife went into surgery and wasn't able to be saved. And in doing so she died. But he believes he could have saved her, being a surgeon himself, and he was hugely disfigured by this accident. He was burnt. And so, after surviving, he sort of went off to Italy, but he's come back to Britain, again, another British film, and he's decided to take revenge on the 7 doctors that failed his wife. His name is Dr. Phibes, or the abominable Dr. Phibes. He's lost his voice, and so he has to talk through this voice box on his throat. And he has this obsession with like clockwork stuff. So there's a whole clockwork band, and he plays this big organ. And then and again, I think it's set up for comedy. Like at one point, someone gets skewered by a narwhal kind of thing, and they have to unscrew them off this thing on the wall. It's bizarre. But he has a clockwork or a robotic female assistant who never talks, but she's there for a lot of the murders. In fact, she participates in one of them. And at the end of it, what you find out is he's actually got the body of his wife in this bed under the floor with this mirrored ceiling. And when he's done when he's completed, this thing just like a tomb shuts on him. It's going to kill him. He's going to have himself embalmed. It's bizarre, like it's crazy at times. But again, like it is beautiful. And there's a fantastic moment throughout the film. You see him as Vincent Price, and he has his voice but through a digital box. But at the end of the film, like he takes his face off to reveal this sort of burnt mess underneath, and it's incredibly iconic. And they do a great thing with the posters. When the poster's released, it has this picture of Phibes on the front, and they put a big sticker over the front of it and said, "This is too revolting to be shown to the public. It would make you sick." And it was, "Oh my god, this is amazing! Gotta go see it." And it worked really well. And the first one is fantastic. It's a really good film. The revenge killing flicks. There was also The Rise of Dr. Phibes Rises, or The Rise of Dr. Phibes, which is a sequel, which is not as good, but it's still really good fun. But again, that's about him looking for forms of immortality, I think, to bring back his wife. And again, he kills off a bunch of people. What I should say is, just quickly, as we round out on these, because they're the ones I wanted to mention, is that Theatre of Blood and the Phibes duology, they precede a lot of like the slasher films, and they're not quite slashers, but everyone talks about like Psycho and what's it called, Peeping Tom from Britain, those sort of films, and then you get these things like then there was Black Christmas and these other films. And I think it's just worth pointing out that these films, Theatre of Blood and another one called Madhouse that Price did, in the Phibes films, really are slasher films. They're proto-slasher films in a different way. Like he's an aging actor. Like he's not like Michael Myers stalking people and killing people. It's done with human stuff and more like booby traps or sort of like complicated death. But it's still like these complex killings being orchestrated by a single person. They are slasher films to an extent without being slasher films, and I think they should be recognised as such. I really do. I really think that these films, and I would probably put those 4 up there, as I've just said, Theatre of Blood, the 2 Phibes films, and Madhouse, as examples of this idea of slasher films, and they are great. So again, you know, Vincent Price, ahead of the curve. Anyway, that was all I wanted to do today. That was what I do. I wanted to enjoy it. This is coming out on his birthday as well. You may be listening to this on his birthday. I don't know, but 27th of May is Vincent Price's birthday. And Christopher Lee's, for that matter. And actually the day before, 26th, yesterday, was Peter Cushing's birthday. A trifecta of horror iconography. Absolutely fantastic. But we're here for Vincent Price. 27th of May. 110 years old. I tip my hat to you, sir. Happy birthday. And thank you very much for such wonderful films. And if you have any favourites, if you've got a favourite Vincent Price films, 5 Vincent Price films, let me know. Get in contact. You can contact me on Twitter at 20th Century Geek, or it's all going to be 20th Century Geek, but email me 20thCenturyGeek@gmail.com. Find me on other social medias, Instagram and Facebook. Just look for 20th Century Geek. You'll find me right there. Go visit the website. We've got a contacts page on the website, and we've got a whole bunch of other things on the website as well. We've got the other episodes, we've got blogs, we've got reviews, newsletters. Sign up for the newsletter. Find out more about what I've been going on, reviews and ideas and things I've got going on in my life. All of it at 20thCenturyGeek.com. And if you really want to support us, and why wouldn't you? We're wonderful, or I'm wonderful at least. I have a Patreon page. It's www.patreon.com/20cgpod. Go and find them. We've got a number of things we do on there. We provide exclusive material for our patrons, podcasts and reviews, polls, all kinds of different bits and pieces that we do for our patrons. So go and check that out. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy some Vincent Price on his birthday. And ladies and gentlemen, I shall speak to you next time.